Good evening to all our friends and partners on Facebook and those of you watching us around the world. Many of you who've tuned into our YouTube channel now that we have AFRIEG, AFRIEG YouTube channel. We want to welcome all of you to this segment of AFRIEG. AFRIEG, as we have always said, is an acronym for Africans for the Restoration of Ethics in Government. We are a nonpartisan political organization designed to harness the expertise of professional Africans and non-Africans or global partners to discuss how our different careers and expertise can benefit the people of Africa. Tonight, I'm going to be doing a monologue segment, actually a teaching segment entitled Writing Policy Briefs. Writing Policy Briefs. Is a very important subject, and oftentimes you rarely hear about that among people who discuss issues of policies, but especially the students, but it's part and parcel of the entire program of public policy and public administration that people need to pay attention to. And as you see on our screen, we are sharing on our screen right now, where we're going to be looking at different aspects of what it means to write policy briefs. We will be looking at, for example, what is a policy brief? Followed by why a policy brief is important, how to develop a policy brief, the outline of a policy brief, and we will try to give an example of a policy brief. But it's something that we believe that everyone who wants to impact policy, everyone who wants to see laws change or who want to impact the making of laws need to understand. It's a way of communicating your thoughts, to have issues that's of importance to you be conveyed to the proper lawmakers or to the proper policymakers so that you can be able to have that impact in terms of policy changes. So we'll be looking at writing policy briefs today. Now, the question is, first thing, as you see on the screen there, what is a policy brief? What is a policy brief? Well, according to the International Development Research Center, a policy brief is a short document. Again, it's a short document that presents the findings and recommendations of a research project to an unspecialized audience. You say it again, a policy brief is a short document that presents the findings and recommendations of a research project to a non-specialized audience. Very key, very key. In other words, when you talk about policy brief, you know, you do a research or you read a research that have been conducted, you study a research that have been conducted, and you get to understand what the findings of that research was and what are the recommendations that the author presented at the conclusion of his research. And you extract those issues and you present them within this document format called policy brief and present it to lawmakers or policymakers so that it can impact policy change. It can be a part of the whole policy formation that the government put forth, or that is something you want to see that you're advocating for. You want to see that being brought into policy. Okay, so you do the research. You read different subject matter, you study different subject matters, and you examine the findings and the recommendations that was done by an author on that subject, and you put it into a policy brief that you present to lawmakers. Now, it is an effective way, okay, a policy brief is an effective way to bring important research to the attention of policymakers and lawmakers. Let me say it again. Policy brief is an effective way to bring important research to the attention of policymakers and lawmakers. Okay, that's what a policy brief is. You draw the attention of these lawmakers and policymakers to an important research that has been done on a very important subject that is special, that is dear to your heart, and you want to advocate for that subject or that issue that was addressed in that research to have a law or policy that address that issue. That issue. It could be a social issue, it could be an environmental issue, it could be a financial issue, whatever it is. All right. It's simply that you have seen this, you have studied it, it's dear to your heart, you have examined research on it, and you put together a policy brief that you can present to these people. Now, it is important to understand that in policy briefs, you are exploring an issue. Understand that you are exploring an issue. Okay, that's why it's important, because you are digging into a subject matter, an issue that at some point, that impacts society, or that impacts culture, or that impacts the youth, or that impacts healthcare, or that impacts education, whatever the field is. Okay, but this subject matter is so dear to your heart that you want to advocate for that subject matter. You want to advocate for a policy or a law that will address that subject matter. Okay, so it explores this issue, and then through the policy brief, you communicate lessons that you glean from the research pertaining to that issue, right? The policy brief, another reason why it's important, because it can be used for policy advice. Okay, so as you put together a policy brief and you present it to a policymaker or to a lawmaker, and they go through the brief that you have done, it influences them, it impacts, how they present, a case for that to become law, or how to present a case for a policy that will be formed by the government to address this issue of advocacy, this issue of importance to you. Okay, so that's what makes it important, because you are addressing an issue, a social issue, an environmental issue, whatever it is. You are digging into that thing, you are studying it, you are researching and see what others have written on it, and you're putting together a document to present the lawmakers for it concerning that. Now, generally, a policy brief focuses on one issue at a time. So when you're writing a policy brief, you deal with a single subject at a time, or a single topic at a time. Okay, you cannot say, I'm doing a policy brief on school, but then you start integrating a healthcare. No, if you're doing a policy brief on education, it's just one policy brief, education. If you can do another one on healthcare, you can do another one on, social issues. I mean, it's wide array. I mean, you have the flexibility, but generally it's advised that you do a policy brief on one issue at a time. Now, in terms of the longevity of the policy brief, the length of the policy brief normally is anywhere between 1 to 4 pages. Maximum is advised 4 pages. All right, it's advised 4 pages, and the reason why is because notice at the end of the definition we said it is given to who? Non-specialized audience or non-specialized person. So you cannot expect a representative or senator to go who have never done scientific research to go read or research work that's about 300 pages. Believe me, they don't have the time to do that. You don't expect a senator or a lawmaker to go sit down and read a dissertation that's about 75 pages. They don't have the time to do that. All right. So the policy brief is a small document, okay, a condensed document, based on those research to 500 pages, whatever it is. You condense it into a minimum between 1 and 4 pages, and you present it so that because as they read it, they get the gist of what you are advocating for. They get an understanding, in-depth knowledge of what you are advocating for. All right, so it's very, very important. Why a policy brief? That's one of the reasons why it's important, because it doesn't just bring the issue to light, but it brings it in a condensed format that a lawmaker can easily read quickly and get what you're trying to say and understand what you're trying to advocate about. All right, policy brief is important. Another reason important is just simply this, because generally in our day and time today, what we see is that most people, okay, how they get laws passed or how they get policies changed or policies formed is either through protests, through riots, all these things we see in our community, demonstrations, generally that's what we see nowadays. That's what we see going on now. As people begin to demonstrate and riot and cause a major outcry, lawmakers get concerned and start passing policies quickly to address the needs. And I'm not going to see whether that is right or wrong. I'm not going to go into that. I'm just simply saying that's another approach to get policies formed, or to get your issues being placed into law. Is just simplifying an intellectual platform like this, where you put together a policy brief and you meet with lawmakers, or you meet with a policymaker and explain to them your concern or your issue or whatever you're advocating for, and you present them with this official document. It is an official document, folks, a policy brief. It is an official document, okay, that you have done a research and that you're presenting them within this document. They see clearly the pros and cons and the need for policy. Okay, so in all instances, people have to go start demonstrating and rioting to get policy, formed or to get laws passed. Okay, so policy brief is a scholarly format, is an intellectual format that you look at issues existing in culture and you put together an official document, a condensed document that you can present to lawmakers so that they can present it on the floor and argue it and debate it. But at least you have done the homework for them, and they see the pros and the cons concerning why this issue we need a policy on this issue, or we need a law to address this specific issue. All right. So it's between there are some policy briefs that, it's just one page, and we're going to look at the different, we'll come down to see, how to develop it in the outline, but there's some policy briefs that are just one page. Okay. And it has the essential issues just on one page that lawmaker, when you present it to him or her, can just, because again, and one of the reasons why it has to be a short document, because it is believed generally that policy makers or policy actors or lawmakers will give anywhere between 30 minutes to maximum 60 minutes, so 30 minutes to 1 hour maximum, to read over your policy brief, to read over anything in general. Anything that you advocated for, you present, any kind of document present to the lawmaker, policymakers, it is believed generally it would take between 30 minutes, maximum 30 minutes to an hour, and they determine whether it's worth the while or whether it's just trash or it's garbage. All right. So that's the reason why the policy brief is condensed, again, between 1 and 4 pages, so that they can just go over it quickly and just see the highlights, the points that you want to get across. And they say, wow, okay, so this is something I think we need to push it forward. We need to form a policy based on what this research has been done, based on what you just presented, or we need law to address this issue, right? So in all cases, not in all cases you have to demonstrate, you have to riot, but start with a policy brief, start an official document that you can present to a lawmaker, that they can present on the floor, and they can debate and see that there's a need in society, there's a need in culture to have policy on such and such issue. Okay? That's good. So now, we're still talking about why is it important, okay? Another thing we want to look at concerning the importance of policy brief is that it is your audience. Remember, we said it's addressed to unspecialized and unspecialized audience, or an unspecialized person, okay? Many of the lawmakers or the policymakers out there, so to speak, let's say the lawmakers out there, okay, they are not specialized in scientific research. It's some of them I graduated from college, that's great, wonderful, nothing wrong with that, is good, but it's not something they do every day, scientific research, all right? So what happens is that, when you sending this document to them, the length of it is important, but again, the message you convey in it, you got to get to the point, you got to be more specific, you got to go through those headings and make sure it's not long, but yet it's concise, and yes, it's informative, that you can just make a quick decision to move on with what you want to advocate for in that document or not. Okay, they are not people that did statistics. So you got to do your research, and you got to put the graphs and the charts there for them to see the percentages of this thing and whatever it is, so they can see clearly. Okay, and then you cite the sources, where you got it from, which research, which article you read, or what dissertation you read. You cite those sources for them. Okay, so they are not specialized, they are not a specialized audience, but yet they are key to getting laws passed or getting policies made, right? So that's another reason why policy brief is important, because you're looking for key people who are influential in policy making and in passing laws. All right. So, for example, if you want to see social justice, take place in your community or in your country, all right, and you look among the lawmakers, senators, representatives, you look there and see who are the key players within the Congress or in Parliament, okay, who I can present my policy brief to, that I know that based on the influence, after I explain to them and they see my policy brief and they see the reasons why I wrote this brief, they will take up this cause for me and they will present it and they will argue for it to be made into law, or they will argue for for a policy that address this issue in culture. So you always want to look for people in a policy area or in the area of law, influential people, okay, that will be able to convey your policy brief and the message that your policy brief has to the rest of Congress so it can be made into law. That's important. They are unspecialized people. So again, your terminology, you got to match your terminology. You try to make your words so simplified to be able to understand it. You don't use a lot of big terminology because again, they are not specialized in these areas. Okay, so if you use the terminology, you got to define it and break it down so they can understand it quickly. Remember now, you got 30 minutes to an hour maximum for them to just read through and know whether there's a policy brief that's worth pushing forward or throwing out of the window. All right. Make sure they are also willing to hear you. Okay, so if you start having conversation with them, you begin to gauge their interest, to see, to see their interest. If there's a sign that you're not interested in it, then I would not advise you to keep pressuring them. Find someone that you'll be able to listen to, be able to listen to you as you explain these issues, and they'll be able to push it forward for you on the flow. Great. Now, next, we're going to look at how to develop a policy brief. Okay. How to develop policy brief. The thing about the development of policy brief, we mentioned you're focusing on one topic at a time. Okay, you're focusing on one topic at a time, one major issue at a time. It's the issue of social justice, then that your policy brief should be only done on social justice, because you want a policy to address social justice, or you want a law to address social justice. So your policy brief should focus on only one single topic at a time. If it's education among teenagers or preschooling or whatever it is, it's only one topic at a time for your policy brief. Okay, so that's how you develop. So you identify one topic that is of interest to you, one topic that needs the attention of the government, one topic that need policy to address or law to be passed about, and you begin to focus on that, right? Then next thing you do as you develop your policy brief, as you find that topic, you also write detail, in detail your purpose for that topic. Why is it you want this policy brief to address this thing? Why is this important to you? All right. So you identify your topic, and then you write a purpose for which you are doing this policy brief on this topic, on this subject, on this issue. Okay, make sure it's detailed now, because that person not specialized in this area. They don't know about social justice like you, or they don't know about childhood obesity like you. You are going to educate them based on how you write. So you get your topic, and then you focus on writing a detailed purpose for that topic. All right, as you are developing your policy brief, and then you begin to identify research. Okay, so there are three major steps to this thing. Okay, there are other things we'll come on. We'll look at the outline, but we're just developing it. To develop it, you're looking at the topic, the issue of concern to you, the reason, the purpose for which this is of concern to you, and then research that have been done on this issue. Okay, so those are things you jot down on a piece of paper or on a notebook as you start developing your policy brief, because the entire policy brief will be based on those three things. What is concerning you? What's the issue? What's the issue? Childhood obesity. Okay, good. Well, why you doing? What is it about childhood obesity that you want us to address, that you want us to look at? Okay, and then what research has been done on child obesity? Because you see, let me say this: every good policy has to be based on research. We have emphasized that so many times. We have speakers come here to say that every good policy has to be done based on research, scientific research. And policy briefs is another avenue by which you convey to these lawmakers that this issue has scientific research backing. It has been studied by X amount of people. It has been done. It has been researched. There are dissertations and articles written on it, and I have to prove right here in my policy brief. Okay, so policy brief, developing your policy brief. What's the issue? Why the issue is important to you? What research has been done on that issue to defend your argument or to build your case for that lawmaker? Good. Now, number 4, I want us to look at the outline of a policy brief, okay? And I will scroll down a little bit, outline of a policy brief. Okay, now again, this is from the International Development Research Center. How do you outline a policy brief? I mentioned that the policy brief is a short document anywhere between 1 to 4 pages, okay? How do you outline policy brief? It starts with executive summary. Now, many of you know, when you talk about the executive summary, you're talking about a general overview of this issue that's important to you. Okay, so you have a general overview of it. So you read the executive summary, summarizing what the entire, issue this policy brief is addressing. Again, you don't go in detail because just a summary, a brief summary, but it should be engaging to the extent that the lawmaker, or the policymaker that's reading the summary want to read further in the document. So you don't get all the information in the executive summary. No. You kind of spark the interest in it. You stir up the interest in it. And then it will make it, okay, let me go see what the introduction is about. So within your introduction, you are officially now you're officially building the case for this issue within the policy brief. Okay, so the executive summary is a general, overview of everything that's contained in the policy brief. But then the introduction is where you officially lay the case out, state the significance of this issue that you want to address in the policy brief. All right. Now, approaches and research, the approach and results. Okay. After you introduce the issue at hand, and why it's important, your approach and results is where you bring in the research that you have studied, the research that other authors have written, the research work that has been done. Approach and results. So with the approach you're looking at, you're telling them, this issue that we are addressing in the policy brief, is based on this research. Brother this or Mr. Dr. this, this and this person, wrote this research, this dissertation, and they did quantitative study, okay, which means they sent out surveys for people to fill out surveys based on the issue, or they did a qualitative study whereby they interview people, and this was the result that came out of that in those interviews. So your approach and your results simply states what the researcher, not you now, again, you're building the case. It states what the researchers have done on this, has said on these issues. Okay, how many people they interview? Where was the interview done? How many surveys they sent out? How many people responded to this, with the service, send a service back and completed the survey and things like that. Okay, and then the analysis. What are the results of this dissertation or this article? What was the conclusion? What was the result based on the study that was done on this issue? So under the approach and results, you go in more detail on what the people have written on the subject that's of concern to you. Again, policy always should be based on research. So your scientific research comes here on an approach and results. You're not just sitting there and saying, no, I think we need this because I just feel like, I read the article by Dr. This and this and this on the subject of childhood obesity. He or she, they interview 150 persons on childhood obesity. They discover this and this and this. This is the result. 25% of those that interviewed said this. 30%. You're more methodical on your approach and results because again, you're not. It has nothing to do with you now. You're telling this policymaker, this lawmaker, this is why scientific study. This is scientific study on this issue here that have been done, and this is what he just said. And so I'm telling you that we need a policy to address this thing. I'm telling you we need a law to address this thing because a scientific study has been done on it, and these are the results. Right? So your approach and your results are based on the research that has been done on the subject matter. Okay. Now, conclusion, now that's you. All right. So after you have introduced the issue and you have stated what others have written on it and what the results were, then you talk about what's your conclusion. I mean, what your personal perception is based on what has been done. And then you tie everything together based on what Dr. XYZ did on this subject and the results that came forward. I conclude that we need a policy on this. And whatever is you stipulate it, you break it down. You conclude, you let the person know that it is important for you to address this thing. It's important we need a law on this matter. It's important we need policy on this issue. All right. Now, it's interesting because you also have what implications and recommendations. Sometimes you can invert it, that after the approaches and result, you do your implications, recommendation, and then you come to your conclusion. Okay. So there's no fixed way to do it. Okay. I personally would advocate doing my implications and my recommendation first before my conclusion. Because again, based on the results that have been done, that have been studied based on studies, my implication simply means how would this impact policy? Or how does the ignoring this thing impact society? Okay, so when it comes to your implications, what you are doing, you're looking at the impact on society, you look at the impact on the family structure, or you look at the impact on the public in general if no law is passed or if no policy is passed to address this issue. All right, so you look at the result what the person has said and then the implications. Okay, how would this impact culture if we don't pass a policy? How would it impact society if we do not pass a law on this issue? All right. And then you come to your recommendation. Well, my recommendation is that, and you begin to break down maybe 3 or 4 or 5 different recommendations you would have that lawmaker put into, present to the floor for consideration. That I recommend, we look at this area, we take this step, we take this, and at least you bring down 3 or 4 different steps that you want actions, pretty much actions, is called to action. Your recommendation is called to action. Okay, to address this thing, in terms of policy on the streets and in the communities, these are my 4 recommendations I present forward. So that lawmaker sort of when they read it, say, wow. And then they go and present it on the floor and they debate it on the floor. Then he or she will become an advocate for your cause. Now, it's interesting because guess what? They didn't do the work. They did the work. You did all the work. But you presented it in an official document to them that they can read, and they will go debate it for you. They will become an advocate for you. And guess what? Now, they will get the credit, right? They will get the credit because, they took it to the floor. They debated, But in the process, guess what's going to happen? Sometimes they will call on you to come explain it further to the lawmakers. They will call on you to defend, certain things, and that's the beauty of policy making. So you are essentially making, you are influencing the policy based on your research, but you presented someone who is influential, someone who is a lawmaker or policymaker to advocate for you so that it can become law or become a policy. All right. So that's what the recommendation is about. You calling people to action, recommending what actions government should take or what actions should be taken to address this issue. Okay, so that can become policy or become a law. I want to do this next. I worked on my first policy brief, okay? And I'm going to just share some things that I came up with. Now, it's interesting because, let me just say this. When you, we'll go back to the outline here. You see, this outline based on from the International Development Research Center, this outline is based on the fact that you are using, I would say that you're using one source, okay, one research paper, okay, let's say one dissertation or one, a research work that was done on a subject matter, okay. So in this case, if I'm doing a research that Dr. Joe has done, all right, so it's only Dr. Joe research I'm going to be working on for this outline template I have here. Only that one research. I'm not bringing anybody else in. Just that one research done by Dr. Joe on, let's say, childhood obesity. So everything in our policy will be only based on Dr. Joe's research. Period. That's it. That's it. Okay. So if you're doing a policy brief on, let's say, smoking among teens, okay, you find one research work that has been done on smoking among teens, just one. Okay, and then when you come to your approaches, you mentioned Dr. Joe did the research on, smoking among teens. He interviewed X amount of teens, or he surveyed, and these are the findings. And then you base your policy. That's why making policy brief is called policy brief, right? It's small because it's just based on one. Now, however, there are some cases of policy brief that not necessarily you will not just focus on only one survey that have been done by someone. No, what that means is that you will look at different articles that have been done. All right, not limited to one. And so when I began working on this policy brief, I entitled it here, Rebuilding Africa Filling Infrastructure, a Way Forward. Okay, it's a policy brief. It's not long. I think the actual, it should be about 2 to 3 pages. Let's say two pages, the actual document, 2 pages. Okay, because I space things out. And then my references, took it down, but the actual document is like, 2 pages. All right. But I will go through it because what I did it based on one research that was done. All right. When it came to the approaches and things like that, I looked at different studies that was done on rebuilding African infrastructure. Okay, and I'm going to share some things with you based on this. So this is my example here. This is my first policy brief. Now, rebuilding Africa, failing infrastructure, a way forward. All right. So my executive summary: studies on Africa's infrastructure have determined that Africa faces a critical shortfall in public infrastructure. Okay, and I elaborated how millions with electricity, no internet, no clean drinking water, public roads and stuff like that. All right, and I elaborated. I did one sentence: the impact of these failing infrastructures will have dire consequences on human life, the ecosystems, job creation, and the movement of goods and services. Right there alone, that should capture any lawmaker. Okay, that the impact of these failing infrastructures is having consequences on creating jobs, on the ecosystem, on the movement of goods and services. Now, notice what I said next. It is recommended. See, it is recommended that transparency and accountability are critical factors that are needed to rebuild African field infrastructure. So what I did here, even though I said rebuilding African field infrastructure way forward, but the way forward I want to present to them is the way forward concerning what was recommended by the studies I did. The recommendation was what? Transparency and accountability. You see that? Okay, so I'm telling that even a way forward is we're going to look closely in my policy brief. I want to draw your attention to 2 things, 2 words: transparency and accountability. All right, transparency and accountability. And the reason why normally people do that just one, but they overlap. All right. So my executive summary tell them it is recommended. So when you read my policy brief, you'll see that the recommendation that I'm putting forward, that I'm going to be defending, that you should make law on, is what? Accountability and transparency when it comes to building our infrastructure. Okay. Now, then I went to introduction. I'm not going to, you see how it's not lengthy per se. Okay, maybe some of the sentences can be short, but I mentioned the introduction. I elaborate a little bit on what good infrastructure should look like. Okay, the benefits of good infrastructure. Okay, but then I also came down to say that the breakdown of infrastructure can be catastrophic. Okay, and I also talk about what failing infrastructure can lead to economic slowdown and even high mortality rates. All right, so my introduction is that I brought the subject of good infrastructure, what it should look like. Okay, and then what happens if infrastructure fails, and the consequences of failing infrastructure. So I introduced that briefly to my audience. Okay, but then notice, you see, I didn't follow all the format from the International Development Research, and I kind of tweaked my own policy brief based on what I believe I'm comfortable with. All right, so you have that flexibility. The issue is that the point should be consistent, the message should be consistent, but you don't have to follow the exact format that other policy briefs have. Okay, so my policy brief, so with introduction, then I came to the description of the problem. Okay, I separated the 2. So for introduction, I will look at the now with the description of the problem. That's where I brought the different articles in there. Okay, I brought different articles in there because my executive summary said what it was recommended that transparency and accountability are needed. So when I'm looking at the problem now, I will begin to look at what researchers have said about the lack of transparency and the lack of accountability, right? Because those are what my executive summary said. I'm going to be highlighting transparency and accountability. Okay, so when I come to address the problem that African infrastructure needs rebuilding, the roads are invested, things like that going on in Africa, no internet, then I say it is argued that the lack of transparency and accountability are at the core of Africa's infrastructure dilemma. You see that? So I brought in those 2 important factors that was mentioned in my executive summary that I was going to highlight, that I told my lawmaker I want to highlight. Okay, that the lack of transparency and accountability are at the core. Well, how do I know it's at the core? You can just come to the description of the problem and say, oh, lack of transparency and accountability are the core of Africa's problem with infrastructure, but you got to give sources. I told you it had to be done on scientific research. So I quoted a researcher there, Blambo, and also there were so many people that wrote on this thing. I mentioned that. And then I also mentioned, brought another article that was done concerning the foreign direct investment in Africa. All right. And I said, well, additionally, foreign direct investment in Africa remain low compared to Asia and other places because of poor governance, political instability, weak infrastructure, and low economic growth. So I brought in and I quoted, I wrote in parentheses there the reference where I got this article from, where I got this information from. Okay, so under my description of the problem, I'm bringing in different articles that I've read, different authors that have spoken concerning this issue that's connected to lack of accountability and transparency and how it's impacting Africa. You know, I brought these different authors in there to defend, you know, the problem I'm stating out for the lawmaker to address. Okay, without accountability and transparency, sustainable development goals are at risk. Okay, I quoted another author who said that. All right, so within the description of the problem, okay, here in this case, I'm not just dealing with one research that was done. I'm doing with multiple articles that have been written on this thing, multiple research that have been done, and I'm giving credit to those researchers that have written on this subject concerning accountability and transparency. Why? Because again, in my executive summary, I said what it was recommended that what accountability and transparency was one of the issues impacting Africa failing infrastructure. Right? So the description of my problem must be connected to only that. So only that. I told you, gotta be a single issue you are dealing with. So since I only mentioned transparency and accountability, my description of my problem should only look at accountability and transparency and deal with that in my description of the problem. Okay. So in this case, I didn't have the heading as approach and results. No, I just said description of the problem because I'm looking at multiple articles that address that issue, all right, in this policy brief. Now, notice now, after I looked at the problem and I cited all these sources, these authors that are written on this issue concerning transparency and accountability and infrastructure, then I came to what policy implications, all right, policy implication. In other words, now I'm looking at what happens if policy is not passed to address this social problem. What happens if policy is not passed to address Africa failing infrastructure? What happens? Okay, that's the implication for inaction. Okay, so if government refuses to act on passing policies and laws that address our failing infrastructure, what happens? That's what you do your implication. Notice what I said. Public policies that lack transparency and accountability can be harmful to national interest and community development in Africa. So your inaction will hurt Africa if you don't address the issue of infrastructure development. Okay, it can lead to neglect of sustainable development projects and abuse of time and resources needed to complete this project expeditiously. Okay, failure to provide oversight and hold agencies and personnel accountable can create unnecessary delays in providing needed resources or needed services to your citizens. And guess what? It results in what? It results in social disorder, it results in distrust in government, and it results in public outcry. So my implication, my policy implication is telling this lawmaker, if we don't have a policy that addresses the issue of failing infrastructure, we run the risk of, at the end of my sentence, at the end, notice what I say at the end here, we run the risk of having social disorder, distrust in government, and public outcry because you're neglecting the people. They don't have good roads to bring goods and services to the market. They don't have good electricity. They don't have clean drinking water. They don't have internet. You know, so I'm telling this lawmaker as he read this thing that we need to pay attention because this implication, you don't want this implication happening because it will affect your legacy. It will affect your legacy. All right. So after I brought out the implication of inaction, then I went to recommend my policy recommendation. Now, the policy recommendation simply means my call to action. What am I recommending? Because this lawmaker will present this policy brief on the floor. What am I recommending that government does to address this thing and make it a law or have a policy on this thing? Well, look at my recommendation here. Okay. I say the following policy recommendations are therefore suggested. Okay, again, you're not forcing, but you're suggesting as a path forward for a new direction towards change and adaptation of new public policies, processes, and procedures relating to transparency and what? Accountability within African governmental structures, okay, with the intent to rebuild African field infrastructure. Notice I said what? To address that is related to transparency and accountability. Why? Because in my executive summary, I told my lawmaker, it was recommended that transparency and accountability are the two main issues. See that? So my recommendation is based on only what was recommended in my executive summary. I'm only focusing on my policy brief on the issue of accountability and transparency, nothing else. So, but look, these are the 4 recommendations I came up with. Number 1, accountability and transparency policies be integrated in governmental contracts to ensure investors and strengthen public-private partnership with foreign governments, businesses, and non-governmental organizations, while addressing specific sustainable development needs in local communities and on a national level. So again, the first thing I say, I'm recommending that within our governmental contracts, you integrate policies concerning accountability and transparency. So the foreign investor will feel comfortable to invest. So if they read a governmental contract and they don't see any line that say, you know what, we will hold people accountable, we'll be transparent. If they don't see that, they're like, second, should we even give money here? Because there is nothing here saying that they will hold anybody accountable or they'll be transparent. So I'm recommending that you integrate accountability and transparency policies in your governmental structures, in the contracts that you make with foreign investors, okay? Because we strengthen the public-private partnerships, okay? Even if it's now a foreign investor, if it's government partnering with a local business, public-private partnership, still government should put accountability and transparency integrated within the contract you're signing with those businesses, okay? Now, number 2, strong political oversight policies. So again, policies on strong political oversight be included, okay, involving government agencies. So again, I come now to the specific agency that implementing, you know, these contracts. Okay, first one, I say in general, the contract should have something about accountability and transparency, right? But now I'm saying now the specific agency that's carrying all this contract, specific agency that building the rules. So it could be Ministry of Public Works, specific agency that fixing the electric grid. Okay, those specific agencies, strong political oversight involving those governmental agencies be instituted to ensure adherence to rules of transparency and accountability. All right. So again, I'm recommending that part of the law that should be passed or the policy that should be made should involving these specific agency should have strong governmental oversight. It means the government should be looking over the shoulder to make sure they're doing the right thing. They're spending the money correctly. They're allocating the money correctly. They're making the right purchases. Okay. And while they purchase, they're using it for the intended purpose. All right. Now, my third recommendation is that evaluation policy. So you need a policy on evaluation that should be mandated at the completion of the work. Okay. Why do you need evaluation policies? Well, so that you can identify gaps in transparency and accountability. Okay. So how will you know if the person when they get you with the work, if they follow the entire rules? How do you know that they use the money exactly? How do you know that all all that everything you bought to use on the project was used? Okay, well, there should be an evaluation policy to examine what the gaps, to identify gaps in transparency and accountability during the implementation of the project. So they're going to build roads. Well, you ask for $1 million to buy cement, to buy, whatever it is. Okay, well, the road is done. Let's look at what evaluation is. See, were you transparent? Let's look at it again. With the evaluation that you look at all this and things like that, were you transparent in it? Did you do everything? Did you meet the criteria of accountability and transparency while you did this thing to complete it? And it will help you because as you find gaps and you close the loophole for the next contract you give to someone else. Well, my first recommendation here is about mandatory training in ethics in public service. Be required for all agencies to educate the staff and employees on the benefits of transparency and accountability. All right. So all my recommendation is that all 4 of them was focused on accountability and transparency because that's what I told in my executive summary. It was recommended that accountability and transparency are the main factors to consider when you're looking at rebuilding African infrastructure. Okay. So my recommendation has everything to do with accountability and transparency and nothing else. You focus on one issue in your policy brief at a time, not 2, 1. All right, so that's what I brought up. Then I came to my conclusion. All right, and in my conclusion, I just summarized everything I said. Africa's failing infrastructure can be rebuilt and sustained long term to benefit future generations if careful attention is given to integrate a strong system of accountability and transparency in policy formation, implementation, and evaluation. So again, I tie everything now So the two important things I mentioned, accountability and transparency, because the two overlap, right? Yeah, the two both of them overlap. Okay. And I said the adaptation of public policies supports the creation of a regulatory system based on accountability and transparency and function independently. Okay, coupled with strong political and judicial oversight is needed for sustainable development programs to be completed expeditiously, resulting in job creation, reduced unemployment, better healthcare, and better quality of life for Africans. All right, so I tie everything up in my conclusion. Again, it's not lengthy, it's a short conclusion. And then obviously my name is there. You know, that was in 2021. I started, you know, I wrote this thing, and then the sources, and you see the sources took long. Okay, so that's why I took it off the 4 pages. But generally, the policy brief, you know, is so condensed. It's a short. So if I want to take this thing, okay, and I meet a lawmaker in Africa, okay, or maybe in a country where the infrastructure is failing, and I sit down with him or with her and say, you know, look, I've done a policy brief concerning Africa failing infrastructure. And you know, just examine, you know, my knowledge of what you're going through here. This is something you can benefit from, you know, and I want to present it to you. I think is needed. You know, so you sit down first with them and you talk with them, you know, just get a gauge, and you can sense when you talk with them with their interests, you know, and you know what, I can give it to them. Now they will take that policy brief, they will read it, they will go and debate it on you know, on the floor of the Congress, whatever it is. You know, and some instances they will call you to come there, you know, that you will also defend, or you will explain further, you know. So that's a way to even present yourself that you are a policymaker, you understand what it means to form policies, and you are impacting, so to speak, you are helping government, you know, come, you know, based on scientific research, you know, do what is right to help build her infrastructure, you know, do what's right for our citizens. You know, so you can you can do that as a hobby. You can just do it, just something you love to do. You can write these policy briefs, you know, and you find a lawmaker, present it to them on any issue, okay. But the key thing is that that you present to them, you explain it to them, make sure they understand it, okay. And look how short it is. They can go and just read that thing in 30 minutes and get an understanding that this is an important issue. Because, you know, especially when they see the part of failure to address the implication is important. Because the implication tell you failure to act. What happens when you fail to act? When you fail to pass law on this issue, when you fail to pass policy on this issue. So when they see social disorder, distrust in government, and public outcry, wow, we don't want that. We don't want that, you know. And then they look at your recommendation, you know, they can take it and put forth, and guess what? You also what it will reach in there with you. The policy brief will reach in there with you. And so that's another way to get yourself out there too. You know, I strongly believe that, and I do know that many of our lawmakers, whether it's here in America or places that have parliament and stuff like that, you know, they have staff, you know, and some of those staff members should be policy makers, should be policy, you know, people that understand policy, and they should be policy analysts that understand how to do this thing, present a policy brief to the senator or to the representative to go debate. But if you are not a staff member of those people, you can do your private policy brief, and you can go and meet these policy analysts that are working for these people, okay, and present it to them, okay, and have an audience with the senator or the representative say, I think we need to address this in law because this research has been done on this thing, and it needs attention. Because the implication based on this research, the result of this research, so that if we don't act, the future look bleak. Our infrastructure in this era going to collapse. You know, and present hard evidence based on science, based on the research, that these policymakers will make informed decisions, and they will push this forward to be passed into law, or for policy to be formed based on that. So this ends our section today on writing policy briefs. It is very important. As I said, you know, this is the intellectual and scientific, scholarly way to present your case, you know, for policy change, or for law to be passed based on your, you know, something that's of interest to you, something that is dear to your heart, and the impact those things, you know, the impact of those things on society. This is a scholarly approach. This is the methodology you should follow. You have your policy brief. Again, if you're looking at only one research work or dissertation, this, what you see before me, this template from the International Development Research Center is a right one to follow. You know, but if you're just getting different articles, and then you can follow the one that I put there, you know, that I did my policy brief on. Your executive summary, your introduction, and then your problem. So instead of approach to result, you just put problem here, And then with the problem, you write all that is different articles have been written concerning that issue. You put it, you explain and you document it, and then you do your implication and then do your conclusion last. All right. But whatever style you follow, whatever format you follow is your choosing. I just think the gist of the policy brief is making sure that it is condensed. It is not too lengthy. Again, as I said, 1 to 4 pages maximum. I like 1 to 2 pages. I think it's small enough, it's short enough that someone, a policy analyst and a lawmaker can read it quickly, get the idea of what you're trying to convey, and they become your advocate. They become your advocate. And guess what? Sometimes too, it's an opportunity as well, because anytime they need, they will start calling you, do we have another policy brief? Or they will tell you, what, can you do a policy brief on childhood education? Can you do a policy brief on, teenage pregnancy? Can you do a, it just the sky's the limit, But we as policymakers, we as public administrators, we can impact laws and policies if we put together sound policy briefs and present it to these lawmakers that they will debate it on the floor for us. So you can be your own advocate as well as you partner with them. So I want to thank you again for joining me on this segment of policy briefs. How to write policy brief. I hope and pray that many of you who believe in politics, I know many of us believe in politics and political science, treasure this resource I just gave. You're going to have it on YouTube as well, our YouTube AfriH, our YouTube channel, that you can access it, and that you can put together policy briefs that you present to lawmakers, that you affect change in the culture, change in this community, and even change in your nation. I will also want to leave you again with the motto of our organization. We believe strongly that Africa can do better if she simply does right. Have a good night, everybody. Look to see you sometime next week again with another segment of AfriH. Good night.